Welcome, everybody, to another Live with Kevin, a very special Live with Kevin. Glad that you're here. I have a feeling we're going to have a lot of people here today. At least I think we are. I hope we are. You see me looking over my shoulder. You'll understand why in a second. And you're maybe wondering why there's just me. If you've been here before, why is there not a split screen showing up? Well, more about that in a second, too. Regardless, I'm glad that you're here for another Live with Kevin, a very special episode of what eventually will be the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. You see that up over my shoulder. Whenever we do these, I always encourage you to engage, to say hello, tell us where you're located. I'm certainly going to say that today. And I always say to you that I just want you to imagine that you're joining my guest and I for a conversation. Well, that's absolutely what I want you to do today, because today is a episode called Ask Kevin Anything, which means we're going to take live questions from you. And so this will be way more interesting if you have questions. And we have some questions we've already put together, and I'll talk about the we of that in just a second. If you're here, you may realize that I was supposed to have a co-host today, Lisa Ritter McMahon. She's here. Say hello, Lisa.
Hi, everyone.
Yes, but she's not on screen. Why? Because we had technical trouble today with her computer. We think it's her computer. It doesn't matter. We can't get her computer to stay connected, so she's not going to be on screen. So we decided that she could ask the questions from over my shoulder. We tested with someone that she can be heard. So that's what we're going to do. So now that you know the layout of that, if you're here, say hello, tell us where you're located, and get ready to ask your questions. We'll take any question that you want to ask, and we'll ask them. And if we have them, we'll do those. And if we don't, we'll use the questions we've already received, and Lisa will facilitate all of that after I do the opening. So Marissa, this is for you, for the podcast itself. In 3, 2, 1. Normally, I'm doing the interviewing, but today the roles are reversed. I'm answering questions that have been asked of me and by those that are with us live asking, well, live. So now you get the chance to watch Kevin work without a net as people ask Kevin anything. Welcome to a very special end of the year episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast, where we are helping leaders grow personally and professionally to lead more effectively and make a bigger difference for their teams, organizations, and the world. If you are listening to this on the podcast at the end of 2024, in 2025, you could watch us, join us live for episodes, and you can learn how to do that when they're coming up and get a little inside baseball about the show as well by going to either our Facebook or LinkedIn groups, just 2 of the platforms where we host our live streams. And so you can go to remarkablepodcast.com/Facebook or remarkablepodcast.com/LinkedIn to learn all about that, find out when we're live, and joining us then. Today's episode is brought to you by my newest book, Flexible Leadership, Navigate Uncertainty and Lead with Confidence. It's time to realize that styles can get in our way and that following our strengths might not always be the best approach. In a world that's more complex and uncertain than ever, leaders need a new perspective and a new set of tools to create great results for their organizations and team members. That's what Flexible Leadership provides you. And so I hope that you will go learn more and pre-order your copy now at remarkablepodcast.com/flexible. And so now, not on camera, as I just said, not on camera, but nearby, over my shoulder, is Lisa Ritter McMahon. And Lisa is the producer of this show, which means that she helps to book guests and work with guests and make sure everything works smoothly, and does a bunch of the stuff that you see in the show notes every week. So she's joining us today. And so we've got people, Lisa, we got people from Oregon so far, and California so far, and Texas so far. And so I'm sure there are others. Here's what I want you all that are online to do is ask your questions. Lisa has questions, but yours are going to get priority. At least there's a few. Well, there's a few that she needs to ask, because we know that they've come from folks who just weren't going to be here live. So we tested this, and we hope that she can be heard over my shoulder here. And so I'm going to let you go, Lisa, and ask. And I'll just let those of you that are watching and listening, if you can't hear her very well, say so, and then I'll have her talk louder. Lisa, what do you got for me?
Okay, let's get this thing started. First thing, on the soft skills side of the equation, What one new skill will leaders need to be effective and successful when dealing with people?
Well, here's the thing. Soft skills. I mean, you could argue that pretty much everything that we talk about leadership is soft skills. I would like to call them human. I'm going to keep looking at Lisa, and I probably shouldn't. I should be focused on all of you. But it's very weird to have someone in the room and not be looking at her, which is a soft skill, by the way, to actually look at the people you're talking to. But in all seriousness, we talk about soft skills, and I appreciate that question. I like to think of them more as human skills than soft skills. And I do think there's one that's more important now than ever. And I hinted at it in the intro for when I mentioned the new book, Flexible Leadership. I think the soft skill that we have to continue to get better at is the skill of adaptability and the skill of recognizing that we live in a both and world and not an either or world. And so often we want to say, here's the answer that works, here's the answer I know, here's the right answer, but rather we need to be looking for best answers. Context is always changing with our folks and with the organization and with the world. And so thinking about that, I think is critical. So the skill, Lisa and Paul, who asked the question, is I think the skill that leaders need to become even more adept at, maybe even become aware of, is being adaptable and switching to based on the context and what our intention that we're trying to accomplish is, and then flexing our approach based on that, rather than being so focused on what we think our strengths are or what our style is and that sort of thing. And Lisa, they say that they can hear you, that you sound good. So we got folks now from Indianapolis, Luciano. It has been a while. And another person coming in from California. We've got someone in our neighborhood, Lisa. So anyway, give us another, while we're waiting for all of you online. And when we say ask Kevin anything, I think it's anything.
It's anything.
It's anything. So while we're waiting for you all to decide what you're going to ask, Lisa, give me another one.
Okay, so talking about leadership, and we know that the people that join us to listen, ask their questions, are at various stages of leadership. Here's one. How do I transition from being a peer to being a leader without damaging relationships?
It's a really good question. And some of you know that I co-wrote a book with Guy Harris on this that relates to this topic, the idea of moving from bud to boss, and the relationship component of that is a huge part of it, right? So I think the biggest thing in the side of that question, Lisa, is that to recognize that the relationships that exist, we want them to continue. And we want them to continue not just because as an individual, I don't want to lose that person that I have a relationship with, but I can't lose them as the leader either. And so I think part of the answer is in the question, in that you don't want to lose those. You want to keep those intact, even though they might have to change. Because the reality is that once you're the boss, people are going to look at you differently, even if they've known you for a long time. And even if you don't necessarily think you want them to look at you differently, they will. So I think the key is recognize that the relationship matters, work to maintain it, but have a conversation with those folks about how does it need to look, or in what ways does it need to look differently now? And I think that's a really, really important piece of the puzzle. We could probably spend the whole time talking about that. I know that, Lisa, you're just far enough away that you can't really read these, but we got one. Here we go. Luciano says, do you believe that hierarchical leaders with old systems need to change in government agencies to meet today's needs? Well, I'm not a government expert, but I will say that I do think there are two things inside of your question. The first one is that the world is changing, so leaders have to be willing to adapt and be flexible. For sure. And I think that I'll put it this way. When Lisa, when Wayne and I wrote Long Distance Leader, we said that there were a bunch of rules. In fact, the book was built around the rules of long distance leadership. And the first one and the last one was, remember, think leadership first, location second. So I would say the same thing here. Think leadership first, context second, government second. In other words, are things changing? Yes. Do we need to take those into account? Yes. Are hierarchical, is the focus on hierarchy changing? Yes. And do we need to take all those things into account? 100%. But that doesn't mean we need to throw everything we know about leadership out the window. That the reality is that leadership is still leadership. Now, if we're a leader that's been more hierarchical in approach, perhaps because that's how we were taught, perhaps that's how we got promoted ourselves, as the world looks at organizational life differently and looks at organizational life less mechanically and more organically, I think that that does require that we have to think about that more and new. That means, Luciano, that if that's me as that leader in a government or otherwise, that I need to be self-aware enough to know that I might need to do some adaptations and be more flexible. That's how I would answer that. Christina asked one too. So Lisa, she says, if you could only share one message or highlight from your new book with someone that doesn't know your work, what would it be? So Christina, that's like, I didn't pay you to ask that question. That's a really good question. So talking about flexible leadership, I would say it's this, that most of us have identified or been helped by understanding what our quote leadership style is, or we've taken a strengths finders type of assessment, and no disrespect to any style type assessment or any personality or communication style assessment, or even any strength type assessment. All of those are useful and valuable when used in the right way. I also believe that they have all become a damaging factor for us too, because they've moved from being a helpful model to becoming the way we identify ourselves. And so as a leader, if I now identify myself as a servant leader or a hierarchical leader or a facilitative leader or a long distance leader, whatever it is, however I've now decided I'm going to define myself because of the assessment that I've taken, I'm automatically limiting myself. Because in a world that's continuing to change, we have to be willing to change and flex to lead in new ways based on the context we're in, not just based on what our personal preferences, natural tendencies, or habits are. And so we have to be able to move past natural tendency, styles, strengths, and routines to lead in new ways. And so flexible leadership is going to help people understand the intention and context around how to do that. So there you go, Christina. Thank you for setting the table with that one for me to hit a home run. I mean, maybe if it, you know, I'm a clear at bat on that one. And you're welcome, Luciano. And Marlene and our team has put a note there if you want to learn more about Bud DeBoss. So thank you for that, Marlene. What else have you got?
Wait, staying with flexible leadership, and this kind of goes a little more personally, but what excites you about your new book?
What excites me about it? Well, I think that I will say this. I've said this several times. This is the first time I'm saying it like in front of a group. I believe this is the best work of my career. I think that I couldn't have written this book earlier in my career. I think that what excites me about this is that I think I'm helping people see something, maybe not see something new, but give people a way to apply an idea that maybe has been hard for them to deal with or they've struggled with. So that's what makes me excited about it. I'm excited because I think we're really sharing something. I don't know, thousands of books on leadership have been written. And Lisa would say, well, maybe not thousands, but there's hundreds in this office. And I really think we're giving people some new thinking and some new tools. And I'm super, super excited about that. So we've got some more questions here that have come in here, Lisa.
Okay.
And again, since you can't see them over your shoulder, Nicholas says, as a young leader, I find myself as a servant leader, someone who is very empathetic towards the individual contributors on the team, specifically when they're frustrated with the organization as a whole. Cool. I don't want to minimize their feelings, but how do I maintain the expectation that we need to meet organizational values despite the frustration? That is a fabulous question. And it's related to the idea that I can be empathetic and yet we've still got work to accomplish, right? Which is an idea related to the idea of being a flexible leader. Like I can say that I'm generally more empathetic. I'm generally want to be leaning into the needs of my team. And yet at some point, Lisa, my dad would have said, you have to put on your big boy pants and go to work. Like, so we can be frustrated and we need to empathize with our folks when they feel that. And yet there's work that still has to be done. And so I think that that's an example of recognizing that there's not one right answer. The right answer isn't just be empathetic or focus on the business, but the right answer is which of and how much of each do I need to be doing at any given time? And Nicholas, you've got part of your answer in your question, just like Luciano, that recognizing that difference is the critical first step. And then figuring out where are we situationally, and at what point are my folks. So I'll just take your specific example. People are frustrated. So here's the thing. We've all had people come into our office and they're frustrated, they're venting, they're complaining, whatever it is, and that's fine. And we need to hear that. And sometimes just letting them share that is the best thing we can do for them. But if they keep coming back with the same thing over and over and over, it's not venting anymore. And it's not just frustration anymore. Now it's complaining. There's a B word that I don't like to use, but we could use that word. But here's the point. There's a point at which we have to say, okay, that's where we are. That's how we feel. What do we do with that now? And we have to get the work done too, right? And so finding that balance, and it's great to recognize, hey, I lean this direction more than the other way as a starting point, but I can't just stay there, because the situation might say we've got to bear down and get some work done right now for any number of reasons. Like if you're in retail right now, it's about to be 4 busy weeks, right?
Yep.
And so at some point, man, we have to go to work and we have to help people. We have to still be empathetic, and we have to say and right. The work has to be done. Barbara says, let's see. I can't read these, by the way, till I make them bigger, just so everybody knows. What are your thoughts about how much professional development should take place outside of work hours, and or how much should be provided within work hours? Well, Barbara, that's a great question. I'm probably not the best person to answer that question, and here's why. It's because I personally have a hard time separating the two, personal and professional development. Like I have a hard time separating those in my own head, because I'm doing the work I was put on the planet to do. And so to me, they're very connected. Now, having said that, I think as leaders, we need to give people time to get things done during the workday. That is development. That's part of the job. We have to help them see that, and we have to try to carve out the work so that can be a part of the job. Now, if you're in retail for the next 4 weeks, professional development may not be on the docket until after the holidays. There's this, for everything, there is a season, right? So I think if you're in the United States and you're an accountant and it's the end of March, the beginning of April, probably not doing a lot of professional development then. But what about the middle of June, right? So like, I think that we as leaders need to help people carve out time and let them know it's okay for them to carve out time. So Lisa might have a different answer to this question, and I'll let her rebut this if necessary. But like, there have been lots of times on our team where we've done book clubs, or I've asked people to read a book. Like right now, I've asked everybody to read about the first third of Flexible Leadership in preparation when we're all together in a week. Now, my expectation is they can certainly read that during the workday. Now, this time I didn't say that, but I think I've said that often enough that that's fair.
Yeah.
People know
Yep.
and yet I'm not opposed to like pushing that a little bit. Like if someone had a lot going on and I said, I got 70 pages I want you to do, or I want you to take this workshop or whatever, like we got to figure it out. But generally speaking, I think it's to our advantage as leaders to give people time and space and permission to do at least some of that. Probably a balance, and I think folks that are really engaged in and looking at the future of their careers are probably going to invest time beyond what you're going to give them. And that's awesome. But I think we want to have a balance on that. We've got another one's come in, but give me another one on your list first, Lisa.
Well, I know one of the things you mention quite often, and I believe it is discussed in Flexible Leadership, is the mindset, skill set, and habit set of not only flexible leaders, but leaders. Can you let everybody know why it's important to have all three?
Yeah. So first of all, that is it's a framework that we've used for a long time here, and it is how the Flexible Leadership book is laid out as well. Mindset, skill set, habit set. Here's the thing. Most training is designed around skill set. Here are the skills you need to be successful. Awesome. If our mindset or if our beliefs or if our values or if our perspective don't align with that, we're not going to use them. Right. So if I teach you, or you read a book, any book, or listen to a podcast, and they give you a technique to use, and you're like, you can intellectually know how to use that technique, but if you don't believe it'll work in your situation, if your mindset doesn't match it, you're just not gonna, right? So the mindset of leadership needs to make sense and help to help our organizations reach the outcomes we want to reach. Mindset needs to match the skill set, but most of you have probably left a workshop of some sort excited, looking forward to applying the stuff that you learned. And so you've got the right mindset, you've got the right skill set, and then you go back to work and it's the real world. And applying these skills that sounded so interesting and so useful in training life is more muddy than that. And you don't have time that you thought you'd have. And so it gets harder. And what's intellectually makes sense is hard to do in application. And so the transition from having a skill in your toolkit and being able and willing to pull it out and then try it, that's habit set. Like turning it from something that I have to something that I use is a huge gap. Sometimes people call that the knowing doing gap. And so to me, Lisa, all three of those are important, and they have to ultimately be in alignment if we want our leaders to have the level of success we want them to have. So that's saying it from the organizational perspective. We could also say it from the individual perspective. Like, you want to get better. Awesome. So like if you're here listening to this on the podcast, you know what I always ask at the end. Lisa knows because she listens to every episode because I pay her to. But the last thing I ask everybody is, now what? What are you going to do with this? That's the habit set question. That's the application question. How am I going to use this is what's really super important. So mindset, skill set, habit set. We got another question from someone on LinkedIn who says, more than just leaders, do individual contributors and employees also need to be more flexible for organizations to be successful? Where do you think this flexibility needs to start? Yes, and yes. So, as human beings, one of the things that we're really good at is pattern recognition. We recognize this pattern. This is how it's done. So I'm going to keep doing it like that. It works. I'm going to keep doing it like that, which is also, by the way, one of the reasons we've leaned into whatever our leadership style is. This is my style. This is how I lead. So I'm going to keep doing it that way. So as humans, we're really good at recognizing a pattern and then locking into that and staying there. And we have this beautiful thing called the ability to create a habit, which allows us to do those things without thinking, right? Subconsciously. And so what we all have to be able to do is to flex and adapt, because in a world that's more complex than ever and more uncertain than ever, how can we assume that the way we've done it for the last 6 years or even 6 months is going to work as the context changes? And so we need to learn to be flexible with approach, even though we might be less flexible with principle, right? Like there are some things that aren't going to change. Human nature isn't changing. It's certainly not changing at the rate that some authors want you to think it is. Like, human nature is human nature. Group dynamics. Are there some contextual things that have changed and are tweaking that a little bit? Yes. Do we need to take those things into account? 100%. And yet not everything in the world is changing. One of the best ways for us to be better at and feel better about flexibility is to recognize that even though some things are changing, not everything is. And so recognizing what's the firm foundation is the starting point for flexibility. So the answer to the question specifically is we need everyone to be more flexible, right? And it starts with leaders, because if leaders aren't, almost assuredly the team won't be. So there's that. What else have you got, Lisa?
Well, this one comes to us from the remote space, and I think it can be applicable to whether you're working with someone right next to you. It can also be applicable for the people in your household. How can I ensure clear communication and avoid misunderstandings when working remotely?
Well, first of all, I'm thinking about the fact that you haven't been in this office, we determined, for almost a year, and here you are for the first time in a year, and yet we work together all the time. So we certainly know this can work. How do we avoid misunderstandings?
Correct.
Well, first of all, we're all human beings, and we are amazing and messy. So there are going to be misunderstandings because communication is hard. So I don't know if we can avoid them, but I do think we can minimize them. And I think that we can reduce the problems that they cause. And here's how I would say that. I think that clear expectations, right? Like the clearer the expectations up front, the less likely there'll be miscommunication, misunderstandings later. So, for example, with Lisa and I, we were actually talking about some of the actual, like, in the moment work processes that we do related to this show, about what happens when a guest is coming and all that stuff. It doesn't matter what it is for all of you, but Lisa and I were having this conversation when we were together just a few minutes before we went live, as a way to check. I was wanting to check if what I was doing was causing her a problem or causing a misunderstanding. And so I think we had pretty clear expectations around a lot of this work, and it's just checking in on those. Hey, is it still working? Is it still the right thing? Is it what we need? And we determined that we're probably doing okay in that particular case. So I think it's have clear expectations and then recognize that we should always check in against them, because as the world changes, as the situation changes, right? So Lisa's got a son who's playing high school football, one more game, and then state championship, by the way, everybody. And then he'll start playing basketball. So there'll be a change in expectation about when the practices are, when the stuff is. And so at some point, that's an obvious sort of change. Like, this is changing. So now we need to reset those expectations. How does that all work? And what does that all look like? But a lot of times in the workplace, things are changing gradually, and there's not a step change like that. And so as leaders, we can stay on top of that, facilitating better communication. But that doesn't have to just be a leader. It could be at home. It also could be, it could be any of us. And like, I would really hope that anyone on our team would say, we need to talk about this because this isn't quite working, right? That doesn't mean that we also can't have time to specifically say we're going to talk about that stuff. So like on our team, when we're all together in about a week, we're going to spend a couple hours just sort of talking about our processes. Like, where are they going sideways? Where could we make them better? Because we can try to keep them in working, but then sometimes you need to say, let's just step back and look. And say, do we need to look at them a little more carefully? So clear expectations that we're willing and able to continue to update is probably the best thing I got for that.
Okay.
What else have you got, Lisa?
So this one, we're getting a little more, as you like to say, inside baseball. And people who listen to the podcast know we have a lot of authors on the show. And therefore, you read a lot. And I am surrounded by books, so I know this. And I'm just wondering what your process is for reading the amount and still making sure that you're getting the information.
Well, so I will say that generally speaking, I read a book for a podcast a little different than I'm just reading. So for example, okay, here's the last one. It's right here. So this was Kelly McDonald last week. We did last week. Mm-hmm. And so you all can see that I've got these little tabs here. So when I'm reading for the podcast, I'm reading with these little tabs with me. Why? Because when I read something that I think I might want to talk about specifically, or that I think makes an important point, I'll put that in there as a way for me to go back when I'm writing my actual questions, only of which about a third of we actually end up using. Then hopefully, there we are. So it's a way for me to be reading, thinking about what I'm reading for, right? So I think maybe that would be my single thing. Like, when I'm reading, I try to be reading on purpose. Like, if I'm not reading for the podcast, the purpose might be different. Like, if I'm reading a book to support our sales team, then I'm reading it through the lens of, well, how is this going to apply to us, or how's that going to apply to our sales processes, as an example. If I'm reading something, and I read a lot of stuff in part of the preparation and the nurturing of what became flexible leadership, I'm reading it looking for the connections that I can draw to that. And so my wife says I read really fast, and I do. And in part because I try to stay really focused on what I'm trying to accomplish with whatever I'm reading. And everybody, if you're wondering how much fiction do you read, Kevin, I would say not enough. Like, I don't read very much fiction. So when you read fiction, it's different, right? And again, I don't read that much of it, in part because of this thing that's called a podcast, where you're doing about 50 of those a year plus Virtual Leader Con. So, I'm probably reading 50, 60 books a year that aren't really, quote, for me. They're for the process. They're for our business. And that's frustrating sometimes, because even though I'm reading great stuff, it isn't always the stuff that I would personally want. And Lisa and I have this conversation all the time, because staying inside baseball, we get pitched all sorts of books. We get pitched tons of stuff, which we say, no, we don't even need to send that to us. That's not going to be a fit. I'm sure there's nothing wrong with the book. It's just not a fit for us. But then we get stuff, and then we try to decide, okay, I'm just making this up. Like, okay, here's a book on resilience. If we've done 2 books on resilience this year, do we really want to do another book on resilience? Or do we want to do a 4th book on future of work right now, or whatever it might be? So sometimes I'm reading stuff, and there are sometimes I'm reading stuff, and you and I have talked about this too, that, like, some of the stuff I read for the show is harder to read for the show than others, because, like, I really do want to dive into it. And so I spend a lot of time reading it. And sometimes it's harder what am I going to pull out of this for the show? So it's, again, I would say the biggest thing is read with purpose, read on purpose would be the biggest thing. I don't know. We've gone about 30 minutes, Lisa. And so I'm going to say to all of you online, if you've got one or two more, we'll take those. If you don't, that's fine. Lisa has still got some more, so we'll do just 1 or 2 more. How about that?
So keeping with the theme of being the end of your podcast, and in the past years, we've done like countdowns of the top downloaded, what have you. And so I'm throwing this because this isn't a reflection episode, but is there anything memorable from the guests we had in 2024 that really hit you, made you stop and think, or good advice to put into practice?
I mean, there's always good advice. And I'm looking over here now just to scan through some of these. I think in some ways, Lisa, this has been a phenomenal year on the show. We've had some really great conversations. I had a really good conversation with, I'm going to just pull this book out. It's near the top. And I'll do this because this was a different kind of episode. The book was called The Case for Good Jobs: How Great Companies Bring Dignity, Pay, and Meaning to Everyone's Work. And when we did it, and now you're gonna say, Kevin, this wasn't this year. I don't know. It might be older than that. It's near the top of this particular stack. But it might actually be older. But here's what I would say. It was a book that, the title says, well, it sounds really good, and it doesn't sound necessarily all that different than what other stuff might be. But Zainab did a really great job of helping me think in a bigger picture. I think some of the books that I like the most, Lisa, are the ones that sort of make me think bigger and not just like technique. Like, we get all sorts of great episodes about how to do this thing or how to do that thing, and all the technique stuff and tactical stuff, which is fantastic. And the book from Kelly last week would absolutely be in that vein, just since it's right on the top. But this book was one that, to me, got me thinking bigger and thinking differently. I think another book I did last week with Adrienne Kelly, The Success Complex, and that's a book that I've already done, but won't actually come out till next year, was another book that got me thinking at a higher level and thinking differently. So I don't know how else to answer that, because there's just so many really, really great shows we've done. I will also say this, that earlier this year, I had the chance to interview Tom Peters for the second time. And Tom is unabashedly one of my heroes. And I remember the first time I got to interview him, and it was only on audio. And so this last time, which was one of the final podcasts he did before he announced his retirement, is a personal favorite of mine because it was a great conversation with Tom. And I mean, I had a great conversation with Seth Godin this year. I mean, I could go right on down the list, but there's some thoughts. Asking me to say what's the best episode is like saying, like, you're going to a desert island, you can take one book. Like,
and that was a little unfair because I didn't give you time to prepare or look back and think about it.
That's okay.
So moving on, what do you do for fun, Kevin?
Since we ask everybody else that, oh, that's fair. So Lisa already knows the answers to this question. So I love to spend time at my farm, our farm in Michigan. So that's fun for me. I collect antique tractors and farm toys, some of which, not the real tractors, are in this room, obviously, but there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 farm toys in this room. And so that's a connection to my kidhood. But something I did yesterday is one of the things I do for fun is I like to smoke meat. I smoked turkey yesterday for Thanksgiving. And so I don't know. I mean, I do love to read too. And obviously I read for work, and I read for my personal development, but I also in professional development, but I do like to read as well. And I guess I can't finish without saying I like to watch my Purdue Boilermakers, especially basketball.
That's unfortunate, but
I know
we'll take it. So you mentioned books, and we always ask, what are you reading right now, or what is something you may recommend?
I'm reading right now, not for the show, although if Nate Silver's listening, I'd love to have Nate on the show. I'm reading Nate Silver's book, Living on the Edge, which is about this thick. And if you don't know who Nate Silver is, he was famous for 538, which he sold to ABC, and he built models for sports as well as model for predicting elections. And I followed him in his new endeavor during the election season this year, and I've been reading his book, Living on the Edge, which is sort of a strange combination of learning about playing poker, which I don't do, but it's really a book about how people think about expected outcomes and expected value. It's a book that fits. I happen to have another book sitting right here that's connected to. It's connected to this phenomenal book called Thinking in Bets by Annie Duke. There's a connection to this book. There's a connection to Thinking Slow and Fast by Daniel Kahneman. It's cool. It's one of the things I'm reading right now.
Okay. Well, I don't have any more questions because we're about the end of our time, and I don't know if any have come in.
We haven't got any more coming in. So
all right.
Here's what we're going to do. We're going to close this out, and I will close for all of you like I always do and say, now what's one thing that you got from this episode that you will go apply? And in this case, it might be a book that you're going to go read or a show you're going to go back and listen to. But maybe it's something that I said in the answer to one of the questions that was useful to you, timely for you, relevant for you. And I hope that you'll take action on that. And I want to thank Lisa it was basically Lisa's idea to do this episode. And I thought it sounded like a great idea and great fun, although it would have been a lot more fun if I could have seen her face during the whole episode. This is not how we planned for it to go. But you know what? Sometimes in life, we have to be flexible. And that's what we've done. And so I want to thank Lisa for all of the work all year. I should also thank Erica for doing all of her images, and I should thank Marissa for doing all of the back end stuff that Lisa doesn't do. So like at the start of every one of these lives, you'll hear me say, Marissa, this is for you. So Marissa does the audio editing and the video editing and all that stuff. So I want to thank all of them for this year. And as we've continued to do the show, 470 some episodes in. And so thank you all for being here as well. If this is your first time or you've been here many times, I hope that if you found it useful, you'll be back for another episode, because next week we'll be back with a guest next week for another episode of the Remarkable Leadership Podcast. We'll see you then.